began not with a scream in the night or the sound of breaking glass, but with a smell, a trickle, and a pink liquid that refused to stay hidden. Before we reach that moment, think about this. Violence is rarely only about rage. It is about control, resentment, and the dark satisfaction of power turned inward on those closest to us. Most of us would never imagine hurting our family. But what happens when old tensions, hidden resentments, and the urge for domination boil over? Would you recognize the signs in someone you love? Or would you dismiss them as just another bad day, never suspecting what lurked beneath? The story of Nathan Robinson, the man who killed, dismembered, and stored his father's body in plastic boxes beneath his television, forces us to confront these questions. This is a story of cruelty so bizarre, so grotesque, that it shocked not only England, but anyone who believes the home is the safest place of all. Nathan Robinson was not an infamous criminal mastermind, not a figure known for a history of violence. He was, in many ways, unremarkable. He lived in Bournemouth, a coastal town in southern England better known for retirees and seaside holidays than for grisly murders. He shared a flat with his father, William Bill Robinson, a man described by neighbors as ordinary, perhaps quiet, not someone who drew much attention. Bill had separated from Nathan's mother years earlier, and father and son coexisted in a strained, uneasy arrangement. Beneath that roof, silence and unspoken tensions seemed to dominate. People often underestimate the friction that simmers in households, especially where broken relationships and resentment accumulate. Have you ever lived with someone where every glance, every unwashed dish, every word unsaid built a mountain of tension? In some homes, that tension dissipates. In others, it explodes. On a seemingly ordinary day in late June 2006, that tension exploded in the most violent way imaginable. Nathan, then in his early 20s, attacked his father. What exactly sparked the final confrontation remains murky. Some reports suggest an argument, others that Nathan's deep resentment toward his father had reached its boiling point. But what is clear is the brutality of what followed. Using a knife, Nathan stabbed his father repeatedly. The blows were not calculated but frenzied, filled with rage. Bill Robinson did not survive. In the silence that followed, Nathan faced the body of the man who had raised him, a father now transformed into a lifeless corpse on the floor of their flat. What would you do in that moment? Call the police? Collapse in shock? Nathan chose something far darker. He chose to hide the crime with methodical cruelty. Armed with a power saw, Nathan began dismembering his father's body. The apartment became a slaughterhouse, the buzz of the blade cutting through not just flesh and bone, but the very fabric of family bonds. Piece by piece, Nathan reduced his father's body into parts small enough to fit into plastic storage boxes. Imagine the cold detachment required to look at a parent's face, then remove it from their body. Imagine the hours of methodical cutting, the sound of metal teeth grinding, the smell that clung to the walls. This was not just murder, it was desecration, an act of cruelty that stripped his victim of dignity, even in death. And then came the grotesque twist. Nathan stacked the boxes neatly, arranging them beneath his television. For weeks, he watched programs, played video games, and lived his life quite literally on top of his father's remains. There is something chilling about the banality of this act. Not just the violence, but the normalization of it. How does someone drink tea in the morning, sit down on the sofa, and rest their feet while their father's body lies in containers a few feet away? Psychologists point to dissociation, the ability to mentally sever oneself from reality. But maybe there's also something more disturbing, the comfort of control. Bill Robinson, in life, was a source of tension and resentment. In death, Nathan had reduced him to silence, to weight, to objects stacked like furniture. Have you ever noticed how some people cling to control in the pettiest of ways? Controlling the remote, the thermostat, the smallest details of daily life? Imagine that impulse magnified to its darkest extreme, where control is no longer symbolic but physical, where domination continues even after death. For weeks, Nathan kept the secret. Friends and neighbors noticed little. Life in the flat seemed quiet, but decomposition has a way of refusing silence. The human body, when confined, breaks down into fluids, gases, and odors that cannot be fully contained. By early July, the horror began to seep out, literally. A pink liquid began dripping through the ceiling into the flat below. The neighbors were horrified, unsure of what it was, but certain that something was wrong. That liquid, grotesque and undeniable, was the truth escaping. The neighbors alerted authorities. When police arrived, they were met with a scene that even hardened officers struggled to process. The boxes beneath the television, the smell of decay, the silence of a flat where a man had been murdered and dismantled. Nathan was arrested, his secret dismantled as thoroughly as his father's body had been. The discovery shocked Bournemouth. England is no stranger to crime, but the bizarre nature of this case, patricide, dismemberment, storage beneath a television, and the leaking pink fluid, was beyond comprehension. It was not just the act of killing, but the cold, surreal way Nathan attempted to live among the pieces of his crime. The case became infamous in local and national press, a reminder that some of the darkest acts do not occur in alleys or remote forests, but in ordinary flats, on quiet streets, behind doors no one thinks twice about. At trial, Nathan Robinson faced the enormity of his actions. Prosecutors painted him as a man consumed by resentment, who turned years of frustration into an explosion of violence. They described not only the killing, but the desecration that followed, the bizarre storage of his father's body parts, and the leaking evidence that finally betrayed him. The jury listened in horror. And you listening now, how would you process such testimony? Could you sit in that courtroom, hearing about the boxes, the saw, the pink liquid, and not feel your stomach turn? Could you look at Nathan Robinson and reconcile his ordinary face with the monstrosity of what he had done? When Nathan Robinson sat before the court, the details of his crime unfolded like a horror script no one could believe was real. Yet, every word was backed by evidence. The boxes, the saw, the dripping liquid that forced the secret out. In the sterile light of the courtroom, the surreal details became inescapable facts. Prosecutors described the moment police lifted the lid of one plastic container, uncovering what had once been a father, now reduced to dismembered parts. The smell filled the room, they said. Even trained officers staggered. Imagine being one of them, standing in that flat, watching television resting on top of human remains, and realizing the banality of evil was right before you. Nathan showed little outward emotion during the trial. His face, pale and unsmiling, betrayed none of the chaos inside the flat where he had lived with his secret. Psychologists would later suggest that Nathan exhibited traits of dissociation, the mental severing of oneself from the consequences of reality. But there was also cruelty in his choices. He did not simply kill. He dismantled, concealed, and then lived casually in the presence of his crime. Some crimes are acts of passion, sudden bursts of uncontrollable violence. But others, like Nathan's, are sustained acts of domination. To cut, to separate, to store. That is not the work of minutes, but of hours, each action deliberate. What does it say about a mind capable of turning family into furniture, of converting blood into silence? The jury was forced to consider not just the murder, but the grotesque aftermath. Prosecutors asked, why the boxes? Why the television on top? Was it purely convenience, or was it symbolic? Did Nathan reduce his father to an object, something beneath him, literally supporting his entertainment? It was not just concealment. It was humiliation, even in death. Think about that for a moment. If resentment drove the crime, then the storage was a final insult, a message. You are beneath me now. Have you ever known someone who humiliates others in subtle ways, belittling them just to feel superior? Imagine that impulse magnified into a crime scene. Nathan Robinson was convicted of murder. The sentence was life imprisonment, the only fitting punishment for such cruelty. Yet even behind bars, his name lingered in Bournemouth like a stain. Neighbors could not forget the pink liquid dripping through the ceiling. The image haunted them. Some could not step into their flats without remembering the smell, the shock, the horror that a father's body had been stored so close for so long. The case became one of the most bizarre in modern English criminal history, not because of the number of victims, but because of the intimate cruelty and the surreal concealment. In reflecting on Nathan's crime, psychologists and criminologists point to themes of control, resentment, and detachment. Patricide, the killing of one's father, is not common, but when it occurs, it often emerges from toxic dynamics of power, neglect, or abuse. In Nathan's case, details suggest a household filled with silence and unresolved tension, not overt abuse, but a cold estrangement. That estrangement festered into hatred, and when the moment came, it unleashed itself with a knife and a saw. The aftermath was not just an attempt to hide evidence. It was a twisted reclamation of power. By turning his father into pieces, Nathan ensured that the man who once held authority over him could never wield it again. Have you ever felt the sting of parental control, the kind that lingers into adulthood, even when you crave independence? Now imagine that resentment calcifying into rage, into an act of irreversible destruction. The crime also revealed something unsettling about human perception. Neighbors had not suspected much. The Robinson flat was quiet, ordinary. People noticed nothing until the liquid began to drip. We often trust appearances. We assume that silence equals peace, that ordinary homes hide nothing extraordinary. Yet behind closed doors, extraordinary horrors can thrive. How many times have you walked past a door and assumed nothing unusual lay behind it? Nathan's case forces us to consider the darkness hidden by four walls. The impact on the community was lasting. The grotesque detail of the pink liquid entered local lore. People whispered about it, retelling the story as a warning of how horror can reveal itself in the smallest, most unexpected ways. Parents cautioned their children not just about strangers, but about the dangers that can fester even within families. The case became a reminder that cruelty often begins in the home. Nathan Robinson remains in prison, his life confined by bars, his name remembered for one of the most bizarre patricides in modern memory. His father's death was not only a loss of life, but a desecration that shook the very idea of familial safety. The home, supposed to be a place of trust, had become a theater of dismemberment. So what do we take from this? First, resentment, if left unspoken, can become poison. Families fracture, silence grows, and sometimes that silence hides rage waiting to erupt. Second, cruelty can wear an ordinary face. Nathan Robinson was not a notorious criminal before his crime. He was a son, living with his father, unseen by the world. And third, horror does not always arrive as a scream in the night. Sometimes it arrives as a slow drip through the ceiling, a pink liquid that forces us to confront what we do not want to see. When you think of Nathan Robinson, think not only of the saw and the boxes, but of the everyday banality that surrounded them. Think of the television playing above the containers, the casual way he lived with death beneath his feet. And then ask yourself, how much do we really know about the people we live with? How much can we trust appearances, silence, or the ordinary rhythms of life? Robinson's crime answers with chilling clarity. Sometimes, what hides in the quietest rooms is the loudest horror of all.